But before we get into that stuff, I do want to give my brief thoughts on the Eric Bischoff podcast from after Raw on Monday night on the WWE Network. I thought it was very good. Not like the most amazing interview that I've ever seen. And while watching it, it kind of occurred to me, like, why didn't they put him on the Austin podcast? Like, that would be entertaining. I know JBL, he is very good in the reporter role. Not a huge fan of his most recent commentaries. I'm sure many people aren't as well. But he is very good at being a reporter and interviewer. So if he continues to do this, and I'm sure he will, they showed clips of future interviews with Ron Simmons and Road Dogg, I believe. They will continue to have guests on JBL's show. And this was also very good, but then again, JBL mentioned during the course of his interview with Eric, or with Bischoff, that he had referred to Austin's podcasts with Bischoff about a year or so ago. I'm pretty sure it was a while ago. They did about, I want to say about in April or May, because I was in April or May, and I was still a freshman in college at that period in time. So it must have been like mid-2014, if not before that. Bischoff was on Austin's podcast, just shooting the shit about a bunch of things. They did like a 4-part podcast on Austin's show about a year and a half ago. So maybe they ran out of material to talk about. Then again, Paul Heyman has been on Stone Cold show many a times over the last several years. So I'm sure they had him also on the podcast and the network. So they probably could do it again if they wanted to. But nevertheless, just a small gripe. And speaking of the Austin podcast, he will be having Brock Lesnar on his show next month, which I'll be talking about when we get into my Night of Champions review, or right before it anyway. But as far as this interview goes, I thought it was very good. I enjoyed it. Learned some things I didn't know. Most of it was kind of rehash from the Monday Night War show that we watched on the network last year, around this time last year, which I also thought was very, very good. But Bischoff, I've always been a fan of his. I mean, he always comes off like such a dick sometimes, or at least he did during his WCW days, and even when he was a GM of Raw. That's why he was such a great on-air authority figure. That's why he was such a great on-air personality, because he came off like such a heel. Hence why I would love to see him back in WWE one more time for like a one-off. I mean, I think the last WWE appearance he made, other than this one interview, of course, was at the 15th anniversary show back in late 07. I'm pretty sure he had some segment with Jericho, or I'm pretty sure it was with Jericho, and Jericho laid him out with the code breaker. Because remember, it was Bischoff who fired Jericho back in 05, so some great storyline consistency there. And that was 8 years ago, so it's been a while since we last saw Bischoff on Raw. Great to see him back in this setting, though. So yeah, they had a good conversation. JBL could have been I'm not even saying he's biased. It's not like he was a WCW guy at any point. But it just kind of came off like a friendly conversation, which was great. I mean, that's a lot of what Austin's and Jericho's podcasts are, even Jim Ross's podcast. They're all kind of conversations between friends. And he also asked good questions too, just kind of the approach he took to asking some of those questions, like why weren't you in charge of Time Warner with one of the greatest turnarounds in financial history? I mean, like, why wasn't he in charge of Time Warner? Like, and he was asking it seriously too. So that was, I mean, like, you really think Eric Bischoff's going to be in charge of Time Warner, despite the incredible turnaround he had with WCW? At the end of the day, he owned a wrestling company. It was an incredible, huge organization. It was WCW, not even what WWE is to this day. So that was kind of a dumb question. Everything else, though, I thought was very, very good. Had a lot of good chemistry there. The time flew by, 50 minutes, and it just absolutely flew by. Part 1 is a little softer than Part 2 will be when they talk about, I'm sure, the fall of WCW, his heat with Jeff Jarrett, Vince Russo. Looking forward to listening to all of that on Part 2, which should be up tomorrow on Thursday, so be sure to check out that on the WWE Network. I'm sure that should be even better than this one. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was very good. They asked a lot of serious questions in regards to Jim Ross and him getting fired, Stone Cold getting fired from WCW, and I mean, really nothing earth-shattering. I mean, if you miss it, you're not really missing much, because a lot of this was talked about, like I said earlier, in the Monday Night War show. He's talked about it in his book. He talked about it in Austin's podcast last year. So a lot of it is some information that we have heard before, but it's cool. I mean, I think it's worth watching, if only just to see Bischoff back in a WWE program for the first time in almost a decade. So hopefully this is not the last we see of Eric Bischoff in WWE, and we see him back on Raw at some point, if only for a one-off in the near future.